Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I don't know if this is on, but we'll carry on nonetheless. My name is Herbert White. I'm the editor-in-chief at the Charlotte Post, and welcome to Legends and Legacy, our Black History Month celebration of people who have impacted Charlotte and Mecklenburg County through their work, their breakthroughs, and their efforts to make this a better community. And tonight we have the pleasure of putting before you former county commissioner, former Charlotte-Mecklenburg school board member, Arthur Griffin, and Dr. Wilhelmenia Rembert, whose resume has a similar feel to it in terms of service on the county commission as well as the school board. So this will be a very conversational conversation. It's our opportunity to see living history. And like we talked about last week, it's one thing to read about it. It's another thing to actually interact with people who've done it. And so from that standpoint, we will get started and talk a little bit about their backgrounds, how they became influential figures in education in Mecklenburg County, their different stories about how they got to this point, and some of that shared background that hopefully they will share with us in terms of their experiences and views of current events, current affairs, and just stuff like that, okay? So I guess we'll just start with you, Dr. Rembert, because you're the one who's not from Charlotte. So your experience is a little bit different. How did your formative years in South Carolina, how did that influence what you wound up doing here in Mecklenburg County, school board, county commissioners, and also you were a professor at Winthrop University. So you've seen it K-12 and then beyond. So how did that influence the way that you approach education?
Well, first of all, Herb, I want to thank you and the Charlotte Post for inviting me, and thank all of you for being here to listen to Commissioner Griffin and me this evening. As Herb mentioned, I moved up south from Sumter, South Carolina. So I grew up during the civil rights era, attended an all-black high school, and was in the last graduating class of that high school, Lincoln High School. It no longer exists today, but I am pleased to say that our Alumni Association bought that high school and paid for it in, I think it was 2016, we paid off the mortgage. And I think we were very, maybe one of very few predominantly or all black high schools where the alumni bought the school after it was no longer utilized as a public high school. And having grown up during that period, I was certainly influenced by the civil rights movement and all that went on during that time. I was a participant in the, we called them mass marches and picketing stores, and having people come to our high schools to talk about integration and the importance of public education for all of us to grow up and to be successful in our lives. So I was influenced by that. I attended Winthrop College. At that time, it was a women's college. Predominantly white women's college. It was built, they said, for the fairest flowers of the Southland, of which I was not one. But there were a number of us who did matriculate there. And I chose that school because my girlfriend, who was our pastor's daughter, went there and encouraged me to join her and others there, and I did. And so that too framed a lot of my experience, having left an all-black community, essentially, growing up and attending an all-black high school, and then matriculating at a predominantly white college for women. And when I graduated from Winthrop, I actually got married. Before I graduated, my husband and I got married while we were still in college. He was at Johnson C. Smith, and I was at Winthrop. We got married and made Charlotte home. And after being here for many years, we were very active in, after we had children. We didn't have any children for about 4 or 5 years, but after we had our 2 daughters, we were very actively involved in their education. At every school they attended, from elementary through high school, we were instrumentally involved. And during that time, I met Mr. Griffin, who was very active in public education, and he was on the school board. He was doing more than most people would really know about, because he wasn't just serving on the school board and you could see him there, but he was very active in the community, trying to get other parents very actively involved in what the school board was doing. And when I learned about his work, attended some meetings where he was trying to really improve the quality of education for students. And at that time, I think there was really an effort underway at Eastover. There was an effort underway at Eastover Elementary where there was an attempt to provide special educational opportunity, especially for Black males. And so after getting to know Mr. Griffin, there was an opportunity to have community people involved in planning for the siting of future schools in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. And it was after our attending meetings that he was having in and about the community, trying to get parents involved. He recommended that I serve on that committee. It was called the Planning Committee. We called it Committee of 33. And I became very involved in that. And after that, the now late Susan Burgess stepped off the school board before her term expired. I was encouraged to apply for that position, to apply to go on the school board. And to make a long story short, I got appointed and became a school board member back in 1998 to fill her unexpired term. And then I ran for election and won that first election, served for 4+ years given the unexpired term. And after that, I lost that election in 2003. I lost my school board election, then ran in 2004 for the county commission and won, and got fired after 2 years, didn't get reelected. So that's kind of my time on the school board and county commission. I left out a lot of stuff in terms of a lot of other community involvement, but maybe we'll get to that in Q&A. And so I served on the county commission back 2004 to 2006 and was actively involved in the community in other ways. And you might be aware, if you weren't aware before, that I did return to the county commission on an interim basis during the illness of Commissioner Ella Scarborough when she became ill, and stayed throughout the rest of her term. Of course, she subsequently passed away, and I completed that term, I think it was December of 2022. And so that brings me to kind of here, I think.
Okay, very good. All right.
First of all, let me thank the Charlotte Post, Herb, and really thank you all for coming out this evening to hopefully allow me to share some information with you, because I want you to ask a lot of questions. So I was born in Good Samaritan Hospital, so I'm a native Charlottean. Grew up over in First Ward on 6th Street, but spent a lot of my time, of course, in Brooklyn. Went to all black everything growing up in Charlotte. But because of that experience, growing up in Charlotte with urban removal, we call it, urban renewal, and being a youngster doing a lot of the civil rights activities, I was like sitting at the feet of really giants here in Mecklenburg County. You know, the Alexanders, Sarah Stevenson, Phyllis Lynch. A lot of folk were extremely active in trying to improve the quality of life and opportunity for African Americans here in Charlotte. So seeing what's going on, experiencing, no one had to tell me about colored water fountains or white water fountains. I experienced it. I lived on 6th Street, so I lived downtown Charlotte, and walking right up the street to Belk's department store or Woolworth's, the colored water fountains and all of the segregation would just smack you in the face each and every day. So having great people around me in my neighborhood, my godmother, you might have heard her name. Her name is Bertha Maxwell Roddy. Bertha lived on 10th Street, and I lived on 6th Street. So a lot of my teachers and influencers are right around me. Mildred Baxter Davis lived on 6th Street. She subsequently was called the mayor of 3rd Ward. So a lot of really activists was around me growing up. And as I matriculated, finished high school in 1966 at 2nd Ward High School, came back to Charlotte and got involved, got a job at Legal Aid Society. And working at Legal Aid Society, primarily dealing with housing evictions, public benefits. The office had been quite successful in a due process case. It's an active case today. It's called Givens versus Poe. And in that case, when kids were being suspended from school here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, there was no due process. It was like, you go home. You go home. And so we went all the way to the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals, won that case that said before youngsters could be suspended or excluded from school, primarily African-American youngsters, they had to have a due process hearing. And fortunate or unfortunate, I wasn't a lawyer, just a litigation paralegal that did federal administrative law judge hearings for Social Security Administration. The lawyer said, okay, Arthur, why don't you do the hearings? Because they like class action lawsuits. They felt just representing individual students was a step down for them. So I said, okay, I'll do this. I'll try this on. And as I was representing students during due process hearings, a couple of hearings really stayed with me. There was a fight at West Charlotte High School in about, I think it's 74. And a white kid walked across the atrium at West Charlotte, if you're familiar with West Charlotte, walked all the way across the atrium, hit a black kid, and they started a fight. And other kids jumped in. And so we represented the youngster, got him back in school. But the black mother said to me, my son can't read. I said, what do you mean? Because I wasn't focused on that. I was focused on your legal rights, not can you read or can you write. And so several parents came to me at the legal aid office, used to be down on East Trade Street, and said, can you help me because my son's going to graduate and they really can't read. And so I started asking questions about the public schools, what was going on. I started attending school board meetings. And some of the things that I heard and observed was absolutely shocking to me. For example, in the late 70s, there were 3 tracks. Dr. Rembert's a professor, so you probably remember tracking in the public schools. There was a basic track, a regular track, an advanced track. And who was in the basic track? African-American girls and boys. A few were in the regular program, and almost virtually none was in the advanced track. And that really got my attention in terms of just simply asking questions. I'm not an educator. I was not trained formally to be an educator. So I didn't know what I didn't know, but I knew something was wrong in the system as our youngsters were being tracked. And certainly what I thought, going back to my own education, where Black excellence was the watchword for me growing up, although we were segregated. Miss Lucille McKay, who lived on 7th Street, was my 7th grade language arts teacher. She would say, hey, you go to the blackboard. It was real blackboard back then. You're going to diagram sentences. Whatever you do, you're going to speak the King's English and learn the King's English. Whatever you do outside is one thing. What you do in here. So my experiences growing up was Black excellence in everything you do. If you're going to be a garbage collector, be the best garbage collector. If you're going to be a painter, be the best painter. If you're going to be a lawyer, be the best lawyer. If you're going to be a doctor, et cetera. And so I didn't see that over the period in which I was getting an education of how the formal process was taking place here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. But because of growing up, Martin Luther King was at our graduating ceremonies in 1963 here in Charlotte because it was all Black. So you had West Charlotte, York Road, and Second Ward graduating. So I was just surrounded by civil rights activists and things happening, and working at Legal Aid Society, which is a law firm that provided legal assistance for poor people that did not have that. I began to like that power thing. It's called law, what was just, what was right, what was equitable. And so I started advocating for students to try to have a better outcome. And because of that, I would go to school board meetings, and I first got on the school board by appointment in 1985. Did not win the election in 1986, but ran in 88, won the election, and had been on the school board up until the time I left to go to New York to work with McGraw-Hill in 2003. The advocacy was tremendous in terms of trying to make sure that all our students, in particular African-American students, received an excellent learning opportunity in our public schools. And so it was a political battle for a number of years until about 1996 when we hired Eric Smith. And what happened in 1996, after hiring and working with several superintendents, we said, hey, we wanted a superintendent would agree to have measurable objectives in this contract. So he was the first superintendent of a large urban school district in America that had measurable standards in his contract, meaning we wanted to see proof of students learning, not just learning, but excelling in reading and math and in science and opportunities. And that was the first contract of the Council of Great City Schools, which is a national organization where the urban superintendent had measurable standards in their contract. And we had a number of I think, extraordinary successes. And I can sort of sum it up by saying the legacy that was left with Dr. Rembert and others on the school board in Charlotte was that we contributed, our leadership contributed to a national conversation on what excellence looked like in public schools in America, not just here in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I'm going to sort of leave it there because I'm looking at the clock and I really want to have some interaction with the people here. But I've been involved with education since 1974 as a non-educator, both here in Charlotte and around the country. So I know education from New York City to Los Angeles and everything in between. And I was fortunate enough when I left Charlotte in 2003 to get a job with McGraw-Hill Education in New York City. And that afforded me an opportunity to not only look at education in the lower 48s, but also in Canada, in the Virgin Islands, and Bermuda, et cetera. So I have a pretty good perspective in terms of what was going on at that time. And I retired in 2015, and I was sitting on the couch, and George Dunlap, who was chair of the county commission at that point, reached out and asked me if I would run for county commission. And I asked my buddy over here, would she run? And she said, oh, hell no. You do it. And the last time I had an election other than 2002 was in 1999. So they were using Facebook and all that stuff. And I said, what in the world? But really, I really enjoyed trying to do systems change because that's what's necessary right now. And so, Herb, I'm going to stop rambling and see if there's some specific questions I can answer.
Well, I just want to throw this back to you. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools has had its share of heroes who look like the two of you. Sarah Stevenson, you already mentioned. Philip O'Berry, who now has a high school named after him, among among others. And you talked about not having that background as an educator in the classroom. Professor Rembert, you have that. For the two of you, talk a little, briefly about that yin and yang, and being able to still be able to ask for that or demand that equity in the way that education is handled in this county, where studies have shown us that there's basically two tracks still rolling in CMS in many instances in terms of not only how students are treated, but how they're taught and what they learn. So as a non-educator and as an educator, talk a little bit about that yin and yang and how you can make that work regardless of where your expertise lies.
I'll begin by saying that even though I spent the largest share of my professional life in higher education, my background was not education. I am a social worker by profession who went on and got a PhD in child development. So I know a little bit about how children develop, but I never taught K-12. I never taught in the public schools. I only taught in a college at the university level. And I was teaching social work students to go out and practice as social workers, primarily undergraduate social workers until Winthrop later developed a master's degree in social work. And then I taught briefly in that program, in the master's program, before I retired. And I retired from Winthrop in 2007. So I've had lots of jobs since then, careers. But I wanted to clarify that wasn't necessarily my background. I just grew up understanding the importance of an education and how important it is for a public education to be an excellent one for all children, no matter what school they attended, so that they would have a real good chance at having a successful life. And I knew that the schools that we had did not necessarily measure up. We had some schools that were very, very good schools, having success for a lot of students. A lot of students were experiencing success. And then we had too many other students that were not successful. And the schools that were not successful tended to be disproportionately populated by students of color, Black students, brown students, and then poor students. And I believe that that's not necessary, because I don't think that poor children and children of color are not able to learn like other children are able to learn if given the right opportunities, if given the right support, if given effective instruction, and if taught in an environment where the expectations for them are as high as they are for everyone else, that students look to be respected in their classrooms, they look to be expected to be successful, And if they are not in an environment where there are high expectations for them and high expectations for the adults around them, if they don't feel like they're cared for, if they're not provided a rigorous curriculum, a rigorous instruction, challenging them in the classroom, challenging their brains, because I see students doing lots of things very effectively. I used to say, you ask an urban student to rap, they can memorize things, they can say things backwards and forwards, they can remember, they are very bright students, so they can learn. That is not the issue. And I was not buying that children who grew up in certain neighborhoods or communities, like the one I grew up in Sumter, South Carolina, somehow we didn't have the ability to learn. I thought if I could, so could they. And when given those teachers who were very caring, competent, effective teachers who they knew cared about them, and the teachers had the supports that they needed to do their work and that they weren't restricted, that students would be successful. So I thought I wanted that for me, I wanted that for our children, and I wanted it for all children.
How about you, Arthur?
Clearly, I didn't know I was doing algebra when we had popsicle sticks. And the teacher would show us 5 popsicle sticks and then turn around and show us 3 popsicle sticks. I didn't know 3 plus what? 3 plus X equals 5? Okay. I didn't know I was doing that in elementary school. I didn't know I was doing geometry when I was shooting marbles in the yard. I didn't know that. I didn't know there were angles when you're playing basketball and the ball hits the backboard and go in. But my teachers knew that and used my experience to make sure that those conventional standards were taught. Teachers took me where I was at. They didn't take me someplace else. They took my environment and my experiences. Something as simple to the girls, for example. You're not supposed to be looking at soap operas back in the day, but they looked at soap operas anyway. So the teachers would say, who's the protagonist? What's the plot? Okay? So we had excellence, and that's what I wanted for all the children. And I'd say as a school board member, if I don't put my baby in that school, then something's wrong with that school. I might be the chair of the school board, but I didn't want any favoritism. And as Wilhelmina indicated earlier, how do we prepare teachers to provide an excellent curriculum? How do we support teachers to have caring, being competent in terms of their craft? I said earlier about going to the blackboard and the teacher saying, hey, there's only the King's English in here. My whole experience was about Black excellence in the classroom. And as a policymaker, that's what I expected. There are standards in terms of writing, the predicates, the verb, the nouns, the dangling participles, etc. So excellent communication skill, excellent computation skill, but also critical thinking. We didn't really know we were being critically taught when teachers were asking us about our own experiences. They didn't have a lot of money, but what's on cans of string beans? There's math and reading and language. So given the 80s and 90s, with all these resources, the expectations for me were high for all children. And when I saw youngsters not being prepared, I wanted to know why. I'm going to shift from the 80s and 90s to now. People talk about the Leandro lawsuit, and the only thing they know about the Leandro lawsuit is that the court said the schools need $700 million. The Leandro lawsuit said, here's what a sound basic education is. And they laid out 4 bullet points for every child in North Carolina to have an opportunity to do that. And in that lawsuit, they equated those 4 standards in a sound basic education to levels 4 in terms of the assessments. In the Andrew lawsuit, they said North Carolina has two yardsticks for assessment. 2 yardsticks. We tell some parents that if your child's proficient, you're okay. We tell other parents if your child's college ready and career ready, you're okay. So who are we telling today is proficient? And who are we telling is college and career ready? Most of the African Americans are being pushed toward being proficient, which is level 3. And the Landry lawsuit, in terms of sound basic education, says you need to be level 4. It's just simply a standard. And what we need to be able to do is make sure that youngsters, when they leave here, they can achieve what's called a sound basic education, because we're no longer competing against white kids. We're competing against Asians, Hispanics. We're competing against the world. And that's what education is all about, is to make sure that when we leave here, that our youngsters will be competitive and have a choice in terms of their careers as young adults. So the battle right now, Herb, is to make sure that we know what the standard is and that every youngster gets a fair shot at achieving those standards.
When you look at this situation now with education, you all have beautifully laid out a timeline from your own education as young people to today. When you look at the state of education today, you hear about things like critical race theory or DEI, and no one is really talking these days, at least nationally and maybe even on the state level, about achievement. How do you convince people that education is still worth having in a time in this country when people are talking about everything except achieving?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's not very difficult, because my history was about excellence. The African Americans who were in my community were extraordinarily well prepared, academically, formally and informally, in terms of being successful. I'm not sure if this was received by everyone, but my whole growing up, African Americans embraced Black excellence in education in terms of preparing you for the future. It was like a shield against the racial oppression that was going on in my neighborhood. And it was not only something that was a personal achievement, it was something that the community embraced. And so not only that parents were more engaged, the community, the African American community, was more engaged in terms of African American excellence in the public school experience.
I think, Herb, a lot of the conversations that we have been hearing about critical race theory and DEI, a lot of the conversations have really tried to divert us from thinking about what we know is important, and that is that we need to prepare young people for a rapidly changing world where they need to be successful at reading, at writing, at computational skills, critical thinking, being able to analyze and synthesize data that is rapidly changing each and every day. And I think that sometimes when we hear the terms about critical race theory, et cetera, those are really political kinds of political language that's used to get people off track, and talking about having folks talk about not wanting critical race theory talk. What were they talking about? Critical race theory being taught in schools, in elementary schools. What in the world was that about? We knew that was trying to get people off track. We know when people don't want to teach children about the truth, about their history, their heritage. We all have absolute right to learn the truth about the history in this country, the role that we played in it, the role that we continue to play in it. We have every right to know it and to teach it and to make sure that students across all races and cultures have an understanding of that, a knowledge of that. And so I would often get too, turned off by that language because I know it was designed to really perpetuate kind of an old line. Well, it's what probably never went away. People who really wanted to maintain white supremacy in this country. And we fought so much against that kind of oppression. There were people who never felt like it should have changed, never should have gone away. They wanted to maintain that kind of superiority, which we fought so hard against. And I felt like that was a big part of what the civil rights movement was about as I was growing up, fighting against racial oppression, economic oppression, social oppression. And that was a way of kind of bringing that all back to the surface because maybe it wasn't so far below the surface.
Yeah, let me just add to that. You don't hear anyone telling the Jewish community not to talk about the Holocaust, do you? No.
Yeah.
So, and you know, it's just a red herring to get folk attention off of the main thing, being the main thing, which is a quality education. And at Alexander Street, as a primary student, we learned about Langston Hughes in our own history. And all of our teachers wanted us to know who we were, where we came from, as a sign of strength, not weakness. So I try not to listen to the bogus discussions about CRT because people don't even know what the heck CRT is. Okay?
And still don't.
I mean, they just throw acronyms out there. But just think about your best teacher. I want each one of you to think about your best teacher. Your best teacher was the teacher that had a relationship with you, that knew something about you. Just think about that just for a moment.
And probably just as importantly, I certainly felt that teacher really cared about me. That teacher really cared about my being successful in life and taught me much more than the academic subject matter. Really taught me how to behave, how to interact with other people, how to demonstrate respect, not just to authority, but to my peers, how to show respect. And so I wasn't getting into fights and arguments with my peers all the time about things that were not important.
So these folks were like life coaches too.
Yes. And they were models. They were incredible role models. I wanted to be like my French teacher. So I can still speak a little French because she taught me. And she made sure that I enunciated correctly. We thought it was anyway. So it sounded good to me. Je suis très heureuse de faire votre connaissance. Always loved her. So yes.
Mm-hmm. What in modern education gives you hope for education as a whole? And I understand there's always a business part of it because you got to spend money on things like teachers and facilities, stuff like that. But what is it about American education, or maybe specifically Charlotte-Mecklenburg, that gives you hope moving forward, if anything?
Well, I complain a lot about Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and I think that gives me hope that parents and adults and others are engaged in the debate and the discussion. about how to make Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools the very best public school system in the country. And so it gives me hope that we're still engaged. As I said to you earlier, I've spent most of my life around the country in education. There's so many communities where they've given up. And when you give up as a community, it really creates a huge burden or lift for children, the teachers, et cetera. So I think what gives me hope is the fact that we still have people in an advocacy role trying to ensure that we achieve the North Carolina constitutional right under Leandro called a sound basic education. So I'm hopeful.
What gives me hope is that at least in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, our community continues to provide significant financial support to our public school system. If you think about not just in the classroom, but even in terms of capital improvements, CMS still gets a lot of money from the county to build new schools. And we were very instrumental during our tenure on the school board in ensuring that no matter where the students went to school in Mecklenburg County, they had better facilities because we renovated and or built, I think, 30 new schools during our tenure on the school board, which was greater than the number that had been built in the 30 years prior. It was during, and to verify that, go around the schools in Charlotte-Mecklenburg and look for our names, because our names are on the schools where we were on the board when they were built and or approved. Built. Okay. And so, to Arthur's credit, he led that effort. It's like, if you're insisting that you want kids to go to schools close to their homes, and you haven't renovated and built new schools close to homes in the Black community, then we got to build and renovate schools in those communities such that students, no matter where they attended schools, they had better facilities, better laboratories, better libraries, better tools, an environment in which to learn. That was one thing. The other was, of course, insisting on a more rigorous curriculum, and that students being able to have access to the most advanced courses, the most rigorous courses in all of the schools. There were some schools, some of our high schools, that didn't offer the AP classes. All the schools didn't offer them, but you'll know the ones that did, such that made sure that those students had access to the most rigorous curriculum, and they could probably do better on the standardized tests that were used to determine whether they were going to be able to get into the college or university of their choices. Well, now I'm encouraged because we have a lot of teachers who are ensuring that our students get access to that kind of rigorous education. Lots of funding at the local level for that. And we have a number of HBCUs now that are hard to get in.
Yep.
Think about it, I understand that. It's tough to get in A&T today. Every Black student who may have wanted to get into North Carolina A&T, for example, but others, it's not as easy to get in anymore. They're more rigorous to get into. And Arthur can talk about Howard, where his grandson is. My daughter and son-in-law both graduated from North Carolina A&T, and they're preparing people for the world.
Okay. All right. So
Let me just,
Okay.
in terms of schools, we built Philip O'Berry. Well, let me back up. The first high school that was built in a primarily Black community outside of West Charlotte in 1953, the current West Charlotte 1953, not the big new one, the old one that was 38. We did that. We opened up Philip O'Berry because we wanted a high school to be in an African-American community. We also built E.E. Waddell because we wanted an African-American community to benefit from a brand-new high school. We built Walter G. Byers, and we also made sure that we named these high schools after excellent African-American leaders and educators. Walter G. Byers was an educator. E. Waddell was an educator. Philip O'Berry, first African-American, served on the Board of Education. So we wanted schools to represent Black excellence in education as we built new schools throughout this community. But beyond that, we also dictated we wanted at least every high school to have at least 12 AP courses, because there were some high schools that had 30 AP courses and some Black schools had none. So we wanted to level the playing field across as it relates to excellence throughout Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. Today, there are some African-American elementary schools in CMS, elementary schools that don't offer elementary honor society. So you remember what I said in terms of the environment and the culture? So we still have work to do, because almost every suburban white elementary school or schools in a white neighborhood has an elementary honor society. As Wilhelmina articulated in terms of citizenship, scholarship, et cetera, why not model that at the earliest levels in K-12 education?
Arthur, let me add to his point about building these schools and making sure they had the rigorous curricula. I wanted to acknowledge his leadership in that Arthur would not agree to us building, say, a new school, say, in Southeast Charlotte, before we built a new school in the Black community. And what he knew was required was that we had 5 votes to say where a school would or would not be built. 5 votes. There were 4 African Americans on the school board at that time. We did not constitute a majority. But he, with his political skills and his leadership skills, worked with everybody on the school board, and he made sure that he had 5 votes to get us across the finish line for building and renovating schools during our tenure on the school board. To me, that's a big part of our legacy, is building and renovating schools and hiring more than had previously been done, hiring Black people to build them. I think we were responsible for getting more Black architects and general contractors jobs to build those multi-million-dollar schools, which had an economic impact in our community for Black businesses. That's why voting is important, and it has consequences. Elections have consequences, because if you don't elect people who can make decisions, and those people don't make decisions that are in our best interest, it's kind of all for naught. But they do have consequences. We hadn't heard their questions.
And that's what we're getting to. We're getting to the Q&A part of this. So anybody has questions? Here's one right here. Yes, ma'am.
There, $2.5 billion, those funds, although I can't dictate to the school system what to do, but there's adequate funds in that 2.5 to substantially address all of the schools you just named. And I don't have a list in my head, but I do recall North Mecklenburg, for example. A lot of African Americans go to North Mecklenburg High School. They're going to knock that sucker down and rebuild it. So there are other schools slated for that. I don't know where Briarwood is on the list. I think
Briarwood's been knocked down, but we, because we got some political people.
Yeah, but what I wanted to say is there's enough funds on there. We give the schools $650 million in operating funds. We spend another almost $300 million in terms of trying to pay for the debt service. So it's a lot of money available on the table right now to substantially improve the physical plant. But let me assure you, Harding High School was a school that people couldn't get into in its old dilapidated way with Dr. Curtis Carroll there, and because it was in Newsweek, Time Magazine, et cetera, is one of the top 100 schools. So the building is important, but it's what goes on inside of that building that really determines the quality of an education. Well, I'll say this last thing, we'll get to someone else. Philip O'Bara, we designed that with Microsoft in mind. Jim Richardson and Governor Martin chaired a Blue Ribbon Committee as we developed that school. That was going to be a high-tech school and a low-tech school. So one half of the school was designed by Microsoft. The other half of the school was designed by the Contractors Association. And we had open bays. That school right now has open bays for big trucks to go into it. We had a house inside of that school, everything. But the leadership of the school district decided to do something else with the curriculum. So I can't speak for that right now, but I can assure you the schools, when we were around, were designed to try to educate the total child, not just those who go into college, but also those who are trying to get certain skills. Thank you for your question, though. Excellent.
Yes, sir?
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to take the time to honor the both of you as founders of my high school by introducing myself, if you don't mind.
Oh,
I graduated from Philip O'Berry in class of 2018. I am also a graduate of Morehouse College. And I want to thank you both for the work that you did do to build my high school and give me the experience that I have had as a black man. My question, my name is Kayvon Lewis. I'm currently a elementary educator down at Movement School Eastland. And I wanted to ask, what do you think is the most, not the most important, if there is more than one, what do you think are the most important grades to start cultivating young black women?
I'm sorry, I didn't, repeat the question again?
What do you think the most important grades are to start cultivating young black women?
The most important grades?
Yeah, grade level, sorry.
Oh, grade level.
Yes.
To start cultivating black women? Oh, before they go to school. Preschool, before they actually enter formal school. I think it begins, really at birth. It begins in terms of nurturing and caring for and continuing to care and nurture as a child grows up. Modeling is always great for girls and for boys to see models of what they can become. And not just in their homes, but yes, first in their homes, because parents are first teachers, okay? Parents are first teachers. And so they begin learning long before they may enter a formal education setting. And so whatever experience girls and boys have in those early years very much inform their growth and development afterwards.
Okay. All right. And this gentleman up front with his hand up.
That's easy.
Yes, it would.
There you go. Thank you, sir. Thank you guys for putting this on. It's been really fantastic. I really appreciated the question about who your best teacher was and remembering who that was. And you've touched on all these things so well, but my first best and favorite teacher was my father. Beyond him, I've had many in between. But if I can be completely candid here right now, I'll tell you, Arthur, that you're one of the best teachers I've ever had. And watching your legacy, seeing how you operate, the things you do, knowing about the accomplishments and where they came from is really powerful. And I've learned a lot from that, so I wanted to thank you for that. My question to you is, what can I do tomorrow to make it better for these kids?
It's just fundamental, Malik. It's called each one, reach one. Okay? Take time to reach a family or another child, or to mentor or volunteer. And if you have more energy and time, you can spread out. but make sure you're committed to one. I was a guardian ad litem here in Mecklenburg County for a number of years. So just grab one child and you'll see the difference, not only in that child, but as Dr. Rembert said earlier, that child's environment would also benefit from your engagement as a mentor and role model.
That's something I can do.
Okay. Oh, okay. We got one more right here. Yes, sir.
I like the way this gentleman put that. My question, well, my comment is, someone mentioned our kids are so bright, they can recite raps and hip hop music, and that's an indicator. Okay. What? Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote the bestseller Outlier, suggests that they represent the 10,000 hour rule. If you do one thing 10,000 hours, you become a master. That's what that represents. That's what Gladwell says. Take it or leave it. But I think if we can redirect that 10,000 hours to carpentry, auto mechanics, any number of disciplines, and then Arthur, you mentioned systems, which would be sort of an IT or a policy-making level. Those track one? I think you mentioned 3 tracks, 3, 2, and 1. Well, if most of our kids are in the track 1, that may be an objective that may be worth looking at. How do we get our kids to spend those 10,000 hours?
I mean, all of our youngsters should be in track 3. Okay, if you're going to be a painter, if you're going to be a bulldozer driver, if you're going to do any of those things, you got to be competent. You got to think critically. You got to be able to work collaboratively with others. You got to be able to communicate effectively in this world. So there are some skill sets. Linda Darling Hammond, I love this lady. She was an educator. She's still an educator, emeritus out of Stanford University. Probably 30 years ago, she said, here are the skill set that our babies need to acquire. They're the same skill sets universally. Thinking critically, what I just said to you. Communicating effectively is important. Working collaboratively. And the last and most important one she said was learn how to learn, because the world is constantly changing. I went to a library thing. We gave some money last week, and the president of Fifth Third Bank was there, and we were just chatting. He's the second bank president to tell me in the last 2 years that the folk that are graduating from college now can't write. Okay? So skill set, the people who are coming into the banks. So I go back to that. Develop those skills, not just go through the motions of getting high school diploma or college degree, but acquire those skills, as Dr. Hammond said, and success is going to be yours, even if you're running a construction company, if you're running your own painting company, or janitorial service, et cetera. Acquire those skills that are associated with success and choice. My grandson, as Dr. Rembert said, is up at Howard, and he was an academically gifted student, et cetera. You know what he said his first week of class? He said, "Papa, you're right. I should have been doing a lot more reading, because they make you read up here." Okay? So your ability to communicate, being literate, et cetera, is important no matter what you do in life. So, sir, I would simply say level 3, but in a different kind of way in terms of level 3.
And
Good.
for a lot of students, they will say they don't see the connections with some of these courses for for moving forward, going to college or whatever, you will not be successful in life anymore if you cannot read, if you cannot write, and if you cannot use the technology. Think about how our environments have changed and how technology has assumed a role that now you can't hardly bank without using technology. You get very basic things, and you don't get to do those things unless you can read, you can write. You might get by a little bit if you can't speak as well, but we gotta know how to read and write, and doing both of them, those two things often, it also helps with the critical thinking. They're all tied together. And the more we read, the more we write, the more we speak, the more we do all of the things you mentioned, you get better at it. We weren't always great writers until we started writing a lot. Not great speakers until you speak a lot. Thinking, you gotta keep doing those things all the time and you get better at it.
I can vouch for that one.
Two observations. A youngster from the lowest income bracket is 2 years old or 3 years old. I can bring them in here today. Their eyes are just as bright. They're like sponges. They want to soak up whatever it is. But by the time they get to fourth grade, some of them, their eyes start to get a little dimmer, okay? That's when you need to start grabbing them, Malik, so that their eyes don't dim. They stay real bright, okay? I'm a county commissioner. We give millions of dollars in the city to businesses coming into Charlotte. Honeywell, Corning Optical, average salaries $80,000, $90,000, $100,000, okay? We have to go outside of Charlotte to get people to work in those businesses because the folk locally don't have the skill set to do that. Isn't that a crime?
Yes.
So what do we need to do to make sure we're graduating youngsters who have the skill set to get some of those jobs? Because this is an economic engine, and businesses will continue to come for the next couple of decades in the Mecklenburg County. Let's prepare our young folk to be competitive to, if they want to get those jobs. I don't want to say, because there may be some youngsters who want to be entrepreneurs, okay? But let's give them choices as it relates to those jobs that will be coming into Mecklenburg County and continue to come into Mecklenburg County so that our babies will have that opportunity. Otherwise, they won't get that opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you, Commissioner Griffin. Professor Rembert, one little piece of business before we adjourn for the night. Next week's conversation of Legends and Legacy will include Ken Kuntz, who is well known around these parts for his work in television and radio, and Fannie Flono, who is a retired Charlotte Observer editorial page editor, who's also well known. And on the print side, we're talking to communicators, which is a skill that is sorely in need of writers and speakers. So that is next week's Legends and Legacy. And please, folks, give our panelists a hand. And good night.